Hello, and welcome to Genuine Alaska Pollock Producers' first Pollock Pod. My name is John Ochoa, and I'm joined by GAPP's Director of Industry Relations, Partnerships, and Fishery Analysis, Ron Rogness.
Thanks, John. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's a wonderful Thursday morning.
Well, yeah, it's a little cold here in Wisconsin, where I'm based. It's -5 degrees this morning, and but the sun's out and the temperature is forecasted to go up, so everybody's happy here.
Yeah, a solid -4, and I think people would be ecstatic in Wisconsin. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, just jumping in, Ron, if you can give a little bit of background on yourself. I know you've been in the industry for a while and you've made a lot of different connections. So I'm sure there's tons of people who know who Ron Rogness is. But if you wanted to give a little bit more of a deep dive into kind of your background and everything like that,
Yeah, I can do that. I started in this fishery, or my relationship with the Wild Alaska Pollock fishery really goes back to 1983. So this year will be my 40th anniversary, I guess. I can't remember how the numbers work exactly on that. And it was an interesting time to get involved. I started as an intern at the North Pacific Fishery Management Council. And it was an interesting time because at the beginning, most of the pollock, it was after the Magnuson Act was passed, the exclusive economic zone was extended from 12 to 200 miles. And so the U.S. took control of the fisheries, but we didn't have the capacity, or the industry did not have the capacity to harvest or catch the fish. Well, that changed pretty quickly during my tenure there. So after 87, I went to work for the National Fisheries Institute, where I was the West Coast Government Relations Representative, and Alaska was within my region of responsibility. So I maintained pretty close contact with the fishery. And Long John Silver's, which had begun purchasing Alaska pollock about this time, and was one of the, if not really the first major buyer of Alaska pollock, converting from cod. Eventually they were followed by some of the other major quick service restaurant chains. So I started doing market analysis for Long John Silver's. Pretty much everybody above me in the pecking order quit in purchasing, and I eventually became the VP of seafood purchasing for Long John's. I did that up until 2002, and then Long John's was sold to Yum Brands, the owner of KFC, Taco Bell, and Pizza Hut. They bought Long John Silver's, and then I transferred over to the Unified Food Service Purchasing Co-op, or cooperative, which is or at the time was the exclusive supply chain manager for domestic Yum Brands restaurants. And at the time we were buying, I think peak was about 54 million pounds, so around 25,000 tons of fillet product. Well, so we were a pretty major user.
For sure.
And but I did that for a couple of years, and then I was approached by American Seafoods to come work with them. I was with American from 2011 to 2018. I had already started doing a little bit of consulting with GAPP at that time, and then I went half-time. And then, if you remember, in February of or January of last year, I think it was the 27th or something, we both came on board about the same time.
Yeah.
As full-time employees for GAPP.
Yeah, it was the Ron and John show coming in.
I think you beat me by about a week as a full-time employee of GAPP, but it was nice to come aboard at the same time.
I think it was good timing personally. And I think on my end, it's more so I come from more of a creative background. I've worked with a bunch of food brands, retail. And so that's kind of where I focus more so on the content creation side. It's been a very fun journey and something that's been fun to navigate and kind of bring what I know into this. So
yeah, I've enjoyed working with you, and certainly, I hope our experience complements one another, because I'm probably the least creative person that But anyway, going back to the background, it's been an interesting ride.
How does the late 80s look in comparison to now?
Yeah, we'll get into this a little bit. The landmark change occurred around 2000, 2001, and that was with the passage of the American Fisheries Act. Prior to that, there was no limit on the vessels that could come into the fishery. It turned into a race for fish, and the number of days fishing was getting smaller and smaller. The producers couldn't pay as much attention to quality as they would have liked, because of the fact that if they didn't catch the fish, someone else would. And so when they passed the AFA and they created the fisheries cooperatives that we know, the shore-based co-ops, and the at-sea co-ops and the mothership. It changed the objective from catching fish, as much fish as quickly as you can, to getting the maximum value out of each fish you catch. But it's really made a remarkable difference. The quality of the fish, the yields increased significantly.
And so you're kind of transitioning there and going into the 2024 A season, which is set to happen this weekend. What does that look like in terms of just kind of like a yearly forecast? And what are you seeing about this season that's kind of standing out to you?
Well, God, you're right. I had the January 20th snuck up on me. I didn't realize we were talking Saturday. Well, just in case there's a listener to this podcast,
just one
that doesn't have a lot of background with the pollock fishery, the A season, or what we call the A season, is also called the roe season. And it's that time of the year when wild Alaska pollock are bearing roe. They go through the spawning process. The annual cycle for wild Alaska pollock is they spawn in late February, early March. After spawning, they start putting on weight during the summer and fall, developing their energy to then start developing roe toward the end of the year. And then the whole process repeats itself. So anyway, traditionally the season starts on January 20th, wraps up in late March, early April. The peak of the fishing last year was the week ending March 11th. For all sectors, they harvested just under 63,000 tons of wild Alaska pollock during that week. The Gulf of Alaska, we don't talk a lot about the Gulf, but it's still an important fishery. It's dwarfed by the Bering Sea fishery, but when you look at it compared to, what we call groundfish fisheries around the world, it's significant. Over 100,000 tons is certainly nothing to sneeze at. End of March, the boats come back to Seattle for the most part, and then get ready for fishing hake in May. So we talked about the AFA and how that made a difference. And in roe production, it really was.
Okay.
So prior to 2001, the average roe production was around 14,000 metric tons. From 2001 on, it's averaged to 20,700 metric tons. So, a huge difference. And when I talked about slowing down the pace of fishing, improving the yields, you can just see how striking that difference is. And, the quotas haven't gone up that much because they really can't, because they're limited by the 2 million metric ton cap that we have in Alaska on all groundfish harvests. Supply has increased since the AFA passed. However, prices have declined since 2001. Go back, the peak price for roe exports was in 2001 at $13,500. The low since was in 2022 at $5,310, so a decline of more than 50%. Although we did see a nice increase, or a decent increase, in 2023 to over $5,600 a ton.
For sure. And with that, though, from like what I was looking at your reports and stuff, it seems that block is starting to, or I guess it's always kind of been on a slight incline coming up, while roe seems to be going down.
Well, yeah, that's a great point, John, and it's very astute, because you go back to when I started buying wild Alaska pollock fillet blocks, it was around $1 a pound. 95 cents to $1.05 a pound, less than $2,200 a metric ton. And at the time, I probably didn't appreciate it as much, but really the producers and our current GAPP members were able to subsidize the cost of their fillet and surimi and other products that they made from wild Alaska pollock with their roe prices and their roe income. That has changed over time. And, you saw at times in 2023, the per metric ton price of fillet block was close to the roe price. So that was something, very unusual.
Yeah.
And I'd never seen before. And quite frankly, if you'd asked me that would ever be the case, I would have said no. So it was pretty astonishing.
Roe used to be kind of the gold mine, I feel like, starting out, from everything that I've heard.
Yeah. I mean, if you go back to oh God, I don't know what year it was, 1990, I think it was, when the North Pacific Council passed an amendment to the Bering Sea Fishery Management Plan and the Gulf of Alaska Plan that banned the stripping of roe, or what they called roe stripping, which was basically stripping the roe out of the fish and throwing the carcass over the side. Foreign fisheries did that. It happened to a limited extent in the U.S. fishery at the very beginning, but the council quickly recognized that they weren't going to allow that kind of waste of fish. They've come a long way in terms of recognizing the value in the other parts of the fish, where we're producing fish oil, fish meal that's in high demand, and fish oil prices were good over the last year.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of where we ended up. To 2024, when you look at this season and what do we expect, I expect something pretty similar to last year. The quota in the Bering Sea is unchanged.
Mm-hmm.
Last year, the fishery everybody was done by the end of March, first week of April. I expect the seasons to be fairly similar. I expect the fishery to perform similar to last year. One thing about the pollock fishery or the Wild Alaska Pollock fishery is that you traditionally catch most of your fish off of 1 or 2 year classes of fish. But because of Wild Alaska Pollock takes up so much of the biomass of ground fish in the Bering Sea, one of the primary predators of young pollock is older Wild Alaska Pollock. But the older Alaska Pollock will feed on younger Alaska Pollock. And so if you have a big year class of mature fish, they will keep the incoming year classes limited because they're eating, they're young, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not until you get that older year class fish down that that's the largest one, that you get a bigger year classes coming in to follow it up. So this year in 2024, we will still be fishing off of the 2018 year class, which is one of the largest, if not the largest on record. So those fish, I would expect to be, they're going to be a little larger, although the growth rates start slowing down. So yield should be good, catches should be good. And I would expect roe averages of, the percentage of total fish weight that they represent will be about 4%. And then once that roe is produced, the industry sends samples down to Seattle. They will be sold at auction, and the Korean and Japanese buyers fly to Seattle and they'll take a look at the samples and they'll offer their bids. And that's the way it goes.
Yeah, I remember my first time going to a roe auction. It's a sight to see. That was when I was starting out, so it was still relatively new. Seeing all that roe in one place was a bit shocking. But then going on the boat in Dutch Harbor and you see all the fish, and it's a lot more. You start to get a sense of kind of the scale of the fishery.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. The efficiency and catching 60,000 tons of fish in a week like they did last year is just impressive. I've always been, one of the things that's amazed me most about the fishery is just how efficient these companies have become. And, there's some advantages to the A season.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is that Alaska pollock spawn fairly close to Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. So the run times for the vessels that are delivering to shore-based plants are quite short. So fuel costs, they save in fuel costs, they save in other factors. The costs, however, are higher, or those savings are countered by the fact that the processors have to have people to sort the roe by grade, and there's 30, 40 some different grades of Wild Alaska Pollock roe, and then pack it to be frozen. So labor costs are certainly higher during the A season.
So heading into the A season, yeah, I know you just put out a monthly U.S. trade report. Do you think you can give us a little bit of a rundown on that? Just a quick little synopsis on what you're seeing and what this month has kind of looked like in terms of exports, imports, and all of that jazz.
Well, sure. Our monthly reports are a service to our member companies. We issue 2 monthly reports. One is a summary of what happens with U.S. exports of Wild Alaska Pollock products and imports of pollock, which is mostly vice frozen product from China and a couple of other Asian countries. The U.S. report comes out in usually around the 10th to the 12th of each month. And then the European report typically comes out around the 20th to 25th, anywhere in there, because there's a somewhat bigger lag in terms of when the EU reports monthly data than the US. The latest reports, fillet exports have been declining since about 2018 as more product has stayed in the domestic market. Fillet prices have dropped since last year. 2022 B season through the 2023 B season We're at historical highs, and we've seen a market reaction to that. Imports of pollock fillets have been declining from 2019. If you look at it to 2015, they were averaging about 60,000 metric tons a year. And since then, they've been around 29,000 metric tons a year. So we've seen a pretty steady decline in what we import of pollock. There's two categories that we monitor fairly closely. One is a category that captures frozen individual fillets, like IQF fillets, and another one that captures fillet blocks. They will both be down again in 2023.
With the executive order in place, do you think that'll kind of drop the imports that you're seeing with pollock coming in?
Yeah, it's going to drop precipitously. It's going to go to zero. I think there may be a few attempts to try to circumvent the rules by putting them in different import categories, but the import categories, in an announcement that just came out today that expanded the number of harmonized system categories that will be subject to the ban, once the 60 days is up, December 22nd, I believe it was, you will see imports of pollock products, not just fillets, go to zero. The bigger question is going to be what happens in the EU. A difference that we saw in 2023 is we saw China's production or exports capture market share from the United States and Russia in terms of single frozen. And that's a discouraging trend. We certainly would like to see more single frozen consumed in the European Union. And we don't have the same protection for the Alaska Pollock name that we have in the United States, because back in 2016, GAPP was involved in this effort to preserve the use of the name Alaska Pollock only for fish that was harvested in U.S. waters. So we don't like the fact that consumers are potentially getting negative experiences from eating twice frozen product, and then they attach that experience to all pollock and Alaska Pollock. I would expect competition in the European Union to get more intense this year as Chinese processors eye the European Union market, given the pending ban on Russian origin products in the United States. But again, that supply is going to dry up, and they're going to have to go somewhere with that product. And there was even an article this morning that appeared, I think it was in Undercurrent News, that they were doing just that. So I think you're going to see more Chinese product coming into the European market, and will continue to capture products from both Russia and the United States, particularly Russian, as they are subject to higher tariff rates now, given a European Union action late last year.
Do you think that will affect anything going forward with trying to get more kind of protection, I guess, with the Wild Alaska Pollock name in Europe? Do you think that's a little bit harder to do if we're going to see an increase in exports to the European Union from China or Russia or whoever it may be?
It may make it more challenging. The bigger issue is just the volume of product and the potential negative experience that European Union consumers are going to have eating Alaska Pollock.
Yeah. Because, I mean, that's the biggest thing is, at least on the marketing side, is if you don't get them in that first impression, it's kind of downhill from there. It's really hard to get somebody to change their mind after they've already experienced something and they're kind of set in their ways with that. So trying to give as many people the best experience you can, especially with food products, is always the best way to go. So it is pretty discouraging to see all of that. But
yeah, the timing of the U.S. action was interesting. It occurred in late December. They gave importers 60 days to continue to bring product in. I believe the administrative order also requires, I don't think the final language is out yet, but I think it requires that the fish had already been under contract prior to the date of the order.
Okay.
So they won't be able to flood imports into the United States. I would expect that January and February were going to be big months anyway, because a lot of product is brought in for the upcoming Lent period, which is still definitely the highest volume sales period in the year for seafood. So it won't affect what's happening in Lent this year, but certainly going into the fall and Lent next year, it's going to make a big difference.
And I mean, going into Lent, we're seeing a couple people come out with their limited time offerings featuring Wild Alaska Pollock, such as Arby's with their crispy fish sandwich. And with that, I assume we're going to be seeing a lot more as we get closer to Lent. But is there anything in the works or anything that you're excited about with a season happening and with Lent happening around the same time, just for Pollock in general this year? Like, is there any outlooks that you have?
The prices are down. Mm-hmm. So I expect there to be better promotions for Wild Alaska Pollock products in the United States, and particularly in the quick service sector. You mentioned Arby's. We have a partnership with them this year, promoting their crispy fish sandwich made from Wild Alaska Pollock exclusively. We've got another one and another new partner for us is HEB, the Texas-based retailer, and they will be promoting Wild Alaska Pollock, not just in Lent, but building off what they're doing during Lent for the balance of the calendar year. And those are just a couple of examples of where GAPP's focusing on the U.S. market and building demand and awareness of Wild Alaska Pollock. So I'm excited about all of our partnerships, but having those two new, one in the retail sector, one in the quick service restaurant sector, is a really exciting time for GAPP.
I'm very excited to see all the results that come from it. And obviously, as we get into the season and being able to help out where I can with all the marketing stuff, it's always fun. So looking forward to that. But Ron, thank you. I feel like it's easier to go through all this data when I'm talking to you about it. So hopefully we can have the listeners kind of have that same experience, and sure, going forward that we can make all of these newsletters and all this news that's coming in about GAPP, we can kind of consolidate it and give our members, partners, industry affiliates, or just anybody who wants to learn more about Wild Alaska Pollock some easily digestible content.
No, I enjoyed it. This went better than I was expecting. So hopefully the audience agrees. And when we look to next month, when we get our final 2023 trade numbers in, we'll be able to go over what just happened in the U.S. market for 2023, where consumption increased, where it decreased, and probably give a sneak peek or a preview of what the per capita consumption number will be when it comes out later from the National Fisheries Institute.
Yeah, well, I'm excited. Looking forward to it. But yeah, thank you very much. And thank you all for listening. If you're involved with A-season fishing at all, hopefully it all goes well. Be safe.
Yes, we definitely want to wish all the fishermen and the processing workers safe and successful A-season as they, I'm sure, are getting ready to gear up and get out on the grounds almost as we speak.
No doubt. No doubt. Well, appreciate you, Ron. Appreciate everybody listening, and hope you guys have a great rest of your day.